their findings and to allow us to help play in that playground. And we're very much looking forward to that and using that infrastructure and those resources. The rolling team, we've talked for several weeks now about the work that Artur is doing related to stack safety, and that work is still going well. There's a PR in related to a bug that he found related to the Stream T transformer. The next step he's proposing is work on abstracting over the effect stack. However, we are putting this on hold, and I'll speak more to that reason why in a few minutes, because that affects everyone on the team at this point. We've also been looking, Ovidiu has been doing a lot of work in the refactoring space, moving to use of a generic F and to limit the use of task. That work is going well. There is a PR open, and we're going to press pause on that, also related to some stability work. And then Danyar continues work on the DAG API and has cleared out the tests work that he was doing last week and is now working on block storage. Casper team is really doing a lot to help support the investigation and resolution of things that we're seeing in testnet, and collaborating with the rest of the team in that space. The Node team is also closely working with Kent on both platform stability and bugs that we're seeing in testnet. We do have a feedback request. The team, the software currently uses a TOML configuration file, and it has met needs so far to some degree. However, from our core development team, we're hearing that the TOML configuration file provides some challenges related to Scala dependencies that we have in the project. And they are proposing a move to a HOCON formatted configuration file. They're very excited about it, and they're also functional programmers used to working in Scala. We recognize that the configuration file affects a lot of end users of the platform, and are requesting some feedback on that recommendation to change the configuration. So there is a link in this document. There's also a link in Discord. If you have strong feelings, questions, or thoughts on this, please do share your feedback. I'm very curious to hear, especially from dApp developers, concerns related to this change, and we would like to take that into consideration as we make a recommendation for a change in that configuration file format. The storage team has provided some better debugging resources to Kent for Casper, and that seems to be working. They have the work completed for the specification for Peak, and we're ready to get started on that today. However, we did a pivot in our stand-up, and I will speak more to that in just a moment. We are complete on migrating the CI infrastructure from Pyrofex to the co-op infrastructure that is running on Google Cloud, and it is running flawlessly. It's going well. We have a little bit of work to complete the deployment of the performance test harness and RDoctor, which is a log aggregator, into Google Cloud. It is currently off Pyrofex. We're not blocked by not having access to these resources at the moment. It's just a matter of deployment. And the team is also continuing to work to build out comprehensive tests for our Mercury deliverables and supporting stability work. So here's where I get to pause and talk about stability work. We are very concerned about the state of testnet and the state of the platform and being able to support a stable testnet, and agreed as a team this morning to all hands on deck and pivot to really focusing on stability work. And to that end, we have people who are currently working on bugs related to stability and testnet success. Will continue to do that, but others who have not been, so for example, Artur and Ovidiu, who've been doing refactoring work, and Łukasz and Dom, who were starting work on Peak, we're stopping feature work right now and seeing how much we can get done related to delivering stability of the platform, and working as a group to figure out what everyone's going to be doing on that. Luckily, they're on their way to bed. I have a couple hours to figure that out, and hopefully they can get started tomorrow morning. Finally, I would talk about the dev website. Kayvon and team have helped migrate that off of Pyrofex infrastructure, and as I understand it, it is ready and running in the co-op's infrastructure on Google Cloud. We have ticketed work to update the Rev issuance page. It is currently out of date, given the update I gave last week related to the timing of feature complete and then the timing of the Mercury delivery. That page is incomplete. We do have recognized that it's important that page be accurate as it relates to the issuance of rev, and people are very eager to understand what that means and when they need to do things by. And so the work, we've ticketed the work that needs to be done to update that page. We still are in a transition period, however. We no longer have a fully dedicated web development team. I am working with Derek and team to help get those changes implemented, and they will be coming. And that's a lot, so I'm going to pause there. Does anybody have any questions?
Well, thank you, Kelly. I was speaking with Kent last night after I found out about some of the testnet status. So I just want to make sure the timeout bug is not the culprit for the blocks not being added by late joiners. Okay, good.
Yeah, they're very different.
Yeah, that's what I thought. But okay, yeah, good. Well, I'll follow back up with Kent and see what intelligence we've got on the block syncing problem as well.
Yeah, and just a little bit of color on that. It's really interesting to watch. You can have a network, let's say the network has 60 blocks on it, and you can join a node and very quickly, like as soon as somebody on the network proposes a new block, that new node will very, very quickly and very aggressively start receiving blocks, and you can see it in the logs and you can see it add. And if it looks almost like if you can add as many blocks as you can in 10 minutes, that's all you're ever going to get. And then at that point, you'll see yourself, my node was stuck on, for example, block 18, and we've seen this in community tests as well. My node was stuck at block 18. I could see that it was requesting, it recognized that it was missing blocks. It kept requesting blocks of the network. I could see the network sending blocks to my node. And it's unclear what's happening at that point. Clearly, they're not getting added. But my node kept up. My node kept in sync with all of the new blocks proposed. Like, for example, I saw block 108 be received by my node, but because I was stuck on block 18, it just wouldn't add it and just continued to request all of the blocks that it was missing. And it did that very successfully for about 8 hours.
Okay, all right. This is really good information, actually. I mean, I have to say, things are things are really starting to feel even more real. And I think you and Ned and Deanna and I all had the conversation yesterday to make stability be pri one sev one in the language of Microsoft. So I'm glad that the team is on board with that. That's really good news. And I think up to this point we really haven't had the kind of aggressive drive towards stability. So there was some testing, but now that we actually have the ability to have a test network, we're beginning to see a lot of the stuff that was latent come to the surface. And while it might not look like the feature development is keeping track, I think this was always going to be stuff we were going to have to address. Mm-hmm. No matter what. I know that there's been some discussion in Discord about, are we still at the same dev rate with respect to getting feature in, and I think we were always going to have to pay this tax mm-hmm. In terms of time. So yeah, I'm glad that the team is on board with this, getting stability, up, getting the network stable. Yeah. Any other questions from folks? All right. So I know we had a board meeting, so we'll give an update on that. And Kenny has the report card, so maybe we can combine those two, and I can turn this over to Kenny to give an update on the board and the report card.
Yep, absolutely.
Sweet.
Okay, I am mobile. Make sure everybody can see my screen. Hopefully it's not too much.
I can see.
Great. Okay, so the report card for December 5th. So general updates, wanted to let everybody know that Kate Gonzalez has resigned from the co-op, and her last day is actually going to be this Friday. So the plan here is that Kate has agreed to help us with a transition. So we have a plan right now for the things that she will be continuing to do after the 7th and the things that she will not be doing. Things like approving invoices. Kate won't be giving second eyes to invoices after the 7th. So do send those to myself and I'll probably nominate on the spot here Bill Swan, but of course he can always shuffle that off if that doesn't work. But at least myself for sure, for if there are any outstanding invoices, which I don't think there'll be a ton, but
I'm happy to help, Kenny.
Thank you, Bill. I appreciate it. So with that, Kate is going to help us out with a search for a new. The exact position is not quite exactly defined at this point, but it's something more like CFO as opposed to treasurer. Treasurer being an officer position that the board would approve, but a CFO likely would be a contract position at this point, because we also had a contract position prior to Kate, and it seems like that might be a good fit considering where the co-op is financially. So we're looking into that, and if you know anybody who's a contract CFO or CPA or anything else like that, please let us know, and then we'd be happy to give them a chat. Updates on items of business. So right now the member participation has it has a working draft, but I do have some updates in terms of governance. So the governance committee was formed by the board over the board meeting, and so that will have an impact on the participation in governance. This is IOB 4. So with that, there will be some collaboration with that process because that is a governance process. I'll just go through these and I'll give you some more details about the board updates and what the governance committee is and what their mandate is going to be. So the monetary policy, this is the IOB 5. We had a scheduled meeting today, but we got our wires crossed and weren't able to make any, somebody was on a plane that needed to be at the meeting. So we'll have to reschedule some of that, but where we're at is defining requirements for developers for implementation. And there are also likely going to be some items of clarification needed from the item of business 5. But Jason is the lead on this, so he will be doing most of that sort of interpreting work, as well as myself and Deanna and Ned, before we push that off to something that is ready for the developers. So the RChain improvement process, we're still stuck on getting another meeting together. There's a draft charter as well as kind of a basic template or a GitHub placeholder. So that's a good segue into the governance committee. So the current draft of the charter was reviewed by the board, but has not been adopted. So what that means is that the board will look at finalizing the charter at the next board meeting, which is January 1st. But what has happened is that the board has created the governance committee. And I want to be clear about what the governance committee is. So the governance committee is a committee that defines processes and procedures for the co-op related to governance. And what does that mean? So the member participation in governance, what is an important thing that the members need to weigh in on? Well, what's that process? What are the rules? How does it get set up? All of those questions, those are going to be handled by the governance committee, right? So it wouldn't be managing this process, it would be defining it, as well as collaborating on all number of other governance tasks like reviewing charters. So for the RChain improvement process, the charter that we have, is that the charter, or I should say, is that going to conform to a standard way of building charters, defining who is responsible, who is accountable, who is consulted and informed, those kinds of things. Right now, the committee will be composed of between 5 and 9 individuals, and they will have initial tasks of reviewing committee charters, as well as defining IOB 4 and IOB 6, or helping to, in collaboration with. It's not a hard, fast authority, I should say, because once these things are done, they still have to go to the board for approval. So they don't have approval power in and of themselves. So there's no change of powers here, so to speak. We see the governance committee as extra boots on the ground to help define what it is and how it is that the co-op works together. So other items that happened in the board meeting, the minutes for October and November were approved. So now those meetings have been approved and are official. and like I said, the committee charter will have to be finalized for the next board meeting. The board also went through some financial updates as well as updates on various active negotiations that the co-op is in. Upcoming events. Next board meeting is going to be the first of the year, though considering that is a holiday that we might change that, but that's the regularly scheduled meeting anyway. And then our fourth quarter compilation financial report will be due at the end of the month. And that's my report card for this week. Let me check chat here to see if I missed any questions. No, I think that's it. Okay, turning that back over to Greg.
That's good. I mean, I you know, as you were talking, Kenny, I mean, one of the things that I feel is really key is we're reporting in this channel on our continued commitment to you know, implement the will of the cooperative. But I think one of the things that we learned with the last general meeting is that a lot of times we do follow through and we report only on this channel, and the membership at large doesn't always stay synced via this channel. So I think we have in front of us a kind of communication obligation to get this information out on other channels. Obviously, Discord is another one, but even there, you know, this channel and Discord seems to be insufficient. So I'm just kind of throwing it out there as a general question for folks here on this conversation. How do we ensure that the members know that that we're following up and following through? Like, how do we make sure that people really grasp what you know, the extent to which you know, these things are ongoing, underway, or completed? Any thoughts?
I think it should be a part of the website. It can be either as a dashboard or as a repo of documents, like Kenny just showed. And you have a place to a place to point to no matter what channel you're in.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good idea. Yeah, so I agree. Website, maybe Reddit is also a good one. That seems like a reasonable one. And then like I guess the other question is, what ends up being sufficient in terms of coverage? Like, one of the things that I find is if the communication overhead exceeds 25% of the daily workload, it really is a massive overhead. and so we can imagine that if we have to, you know, cover Twitter, Instagram, Reddit, you know, Facebook, yada yada yada, as you know, an endless list of channels in which to update, Telegram and so on, then that the communication overhead becomes unwieldy or unworkable. So what ends up being sufficient? I'm curious if anyone else has a good response to that.
Well, Greg, I can say, at least from the analytics and what I'm seeing, Twitter is by far the most successful avenue for reaching people, at least in terms of the social media. Telegram and Discord, obviously Telegram seems to be the most active in those communication channels, but from what I'm seeing, Twitter is definitely the most active engagement.
Okay, all right. So if we have website, Discord, Twitter, and Telegram, and Reddit, just to round everything out, is that sufficient? Are we done? Can we say, you know, each week, whatever the updates are, we hit those marks, and we're done?
I think the question also becomes the volume of updates as we go forward. So having it just depends on what's coming in and what's coming out. But I would say, like, Monday, having announcements go out Monday and having announcements go out Friday is a good practice. Even if it's on one channel, like a newsletter, you know what I mean? Because if the volume goes way up, covering 5 different channels is kind of a problem. But I also agree with Derek that, like, Twitter, like Poloniex, any major exchange, Binance, like Twitter is like definitely like what you look for sure, I would say.
Good. Okay. All right. So I'm just trying to get a sense from the community, because I think, internally within the co-op and also our marketing folks, we've all had a, sort of a general idea, but I'd love to have the community at large weigh in, because for whatever reason, the way we've managed those channels, I don't think has resulted in, a consistent understanding across the community. And of course, we're going to have to live with that no matter what. But because information just travels at different speeds through different communities.
I find that the least, the most the most amount of people who are asking questions seems to be on Telegram. So that seems to be where, because there's just the volume. Sometimes the answers are already there, but you have to scroll up so far.
Yep.
That seems to be the most, because right now we have the progress report on Wednesday on the blog, and that goes out on all the social media. We have the newsletter on Thursday, and then as things come in, they go out on all of our social media channels. So but Telegram seems to be the one where there's the most confusion.
Got it. Yeah, okay. And calling out Telegram, huge props to Jigundu for wading through the comments that come through there, because a lot of them are really negative, and it takes a lot of mental fortitude to be able to answer people's questions when they are just so derogatory so much of the time.
Yeah, I'll second that. Absolutely. I've seen that.
Yeah, and so absolutely. Props well deserved.
It might be worthwhile putting announcements in the main channel as well as the announcement channels, because it seems like people are not reading the announcements, and
that's totally fair. That's totally fair. So
I think I just want to add this. I think it also just is a matter of community engagement, because, for example, just yesterday I saw, I believe on Discord, someone come on and hasn't been paying attention for a while, and then he's like, "What happened to rock?" And that started a whole other conversation again. And it seems like it really depends on the community to stay engaged. And when you get these people who come in just after not being engaged for a while, that creates a whole chain reaction that actually has been going on in Telegram this morning. So that's another, it's a challenge. I can see nothing else other than a challenge.
Yeah, I agree. So a part of that, there's always going to be time warp, right? Because information travels through different communities at different speeds, and part of that has to do with, as you said, attention is not equally distributed across all the different projects that someone might be attending to, and the other part of it is the language barrier, and time zone issues and things like that. So there's always going to be time warp and time lag, but maybe to address that, we also have some kind of previously on, like in a television series, at the top of every episode, there's a previously, and at the end of, or the beginning of the next series, there's a summary. Maybe we can have a channel where people can catch up. So that might be another way to do some coverage. Okay, so I just again, the reason what sparked this is, as Kenny was going through the updates, I had a strong feeling that we've really done our best to try to make sure that we're responsive to community requests, that we take the time and do the diligence, and I think there's more than enough evidence that that's going on, but I'm not sure that everyone is aware of the evidence, and I want to make sure that we can get the information out in a reasonable way. So okay, good. So moving on, Kenny, I don't know if you mentioned this, but did you mention that we closed the loan on our house?
Nope.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead and talk about it.
Yeah. So it was a little bit of a fun ride, because we ended up closing we were funded to just slightly less than $1 million, and that's now in the economic assets, and which Kate gave a report on to the board just yesterday. and it was a bit of a fun ride closing the deal. I will say that you know, we got a lead on a broker from our partners at Immersion, and then the broker got us in touch with 3 different lending firms, and we were able to kind of dialogue and with all 3 in order to get the loan, the sort of best terms on the loan. But the ride got interesting around Thanksgiving. I signed the closing papers. We closed the deal on the Tuesday before Thanksgiving. On Wednesday, they said, "Oops, that was a mistake. We never should have done that." And then we had to wait all through Thanksgiving to go figure out what the snafu was. And it turned out they thought that because we were a cooperative, every member had a share in the house. And so we had to kind of work through all of that, but we got through that successfully, and the funds hit the bank on Friday. So just a little bit of color on some of these processes, and I think that was the other thing I was trying to point out with respect to some of the follow up. You know, when the governance committee charter, there was a lot of work done there, and when the board discussed both the charter and the overall context of the governance committee, I was and Kenny can attest to this. Other board members who are on the call might attest to this. I thought we would lead the agenda with that one because it would be easy. It would be an easy one to check off. But the board ended up spending almost an hour in discussion and deliberation just on the governance committee. And so, and the reason I mention that is because each one of these things, so getting a loan on the house, setting up a governance committee, it's actually a lot of work. It doesn't happen, you know, in the blink. And so it's kind of important that the community understands that with each of these things, you know, whether it's that or it's transitioning the testing infrastructure and CI infrastructure from Pyroflex machines to the co-op machines, all of that is a lot of work. There are a lot of people working behind the scenes, pretty much nonstop, to make sure this happens. And so I think it would be really good if the community understands just how hard people are working in order to present what we see each Wednesday. Okay, so I noticed that we have. A second. I thought we had some reflected people on. Is that correct?
I see Greg Heiss is on the call.
Greg, did you want to give an update this week? Maybe he's.
I think he's on a phone, which it can be tricky.
Yeah, exactly. Also, I wanted to revisit one thing real quick. Phil, is that you? Are you on the call? Is that Phil Strauch on the call? Okay, well, I'm batting 1,000 today. All right. I just wanted to revisit specifically with Phil, sort of what had gone on with the IOB6. But if Phil's not on the call, we can talk about that in Discord or other things. Just wanted to reassure Phil and anyone else who was interested on two points. One is that, you know, the co-op is fully committed to providing specifications so that we can have diversity of implementation, and I'll get to a sort of very concrete follow-up on that in just a second. And the other is that with respect to IOB6, there really was just an accounting error in the minutes draft that we talked about a couple of weeks ago, but just wanted to make sure that everyone was aware that the board really did not provide the support to get IOB6 on the ballot. Um, but despite the fact that it's not on the ballot, and for certain reasons related to resourcing, we have full commitment, and like money and development time behind releasing the K framework spec for Rolang. So that's going to go out with Mercury. So people who are interested in specifications will, well, the K framework spec for Rolang is a far cry more sophisticated, because it's an executable spec that can be used as a reference for any implementation that wants to do the execution mechanism. The Casper spec, well, everyone can follow, and part of the reason we're focusing in this way is because there are other parties who are working to provide sort of independent specifications for Casper, and I have some brain candy related to that, which I'll talk about in just a minute. But the main point is that with respect to diversification of implementation, for Casper, people can go to the specs that Vlad and Nate and other folks have been providing. And then for the execution mechanism, i.e. Rolang, people can go to the K framework piece. So we are very, very committed to providing specifications that have a high degree of fidelity and integrity with respect to what's implemented, so that others can pick up those and do implementations against those specs, and have some sense that, for example, a Haskell implementation of the stack, if it follows those specs, should be able to interoperate just very well with the existing Scala-based spec. Now, with respect to the Casper spec, one of the things that I've been harping on now for a couple of years, we're starting to see movement in the right direction. I mean, there's a kind of analogy here, right? In the same way that we see there was some conservatism, let's say, on the part of Vitalik with respect to CBC Casper versus Casper FFG. There's been a similar kind of slow, steady progress with respect to the CBC Casper crowd, and really understanding the import of correct by construction. So I think one of the things that many people don't quite understand or internalize right away is that when we say correct by construction, the ultimate goal, the ideal here, is that the programs that are the actual implementation of the stack are the proof of the correctness with respect to the protocol. So you don't have to do you don't have an additional set of proof obligations. And this is really important, because if you have a spec and you have some proofs with respect to that spec, but then there's no relationship between that spec and the running code, other than, someone's done an audit or someone's eyeballed it and said, yeah, thumbs up, then the code is still essentially not constrained by the spec, or at least not to the degree that we would like it to be the case. And correct by construction, the relationship between the proof of correctness and the actual running implementation is as tight as it can be. The program literally is the proof of correctness. Now, in general, what we'll find is that is not always going to be the case, because the simplest proof, or the proof that's easiest to communicate to a particular community for, with respect to a particular property, is not always going to be the most efficient one. But there, again, the ideal is the ones that are efficient implementations are obtained by from the proof of the property by means of transformations, step-by-step transformations that preserve the semantics of the program. And so that's how you refine the correct by construction methodology to get to correct and performant implementations. So let me, before I move on to the brain candy piece of this, let me just stop there and see if there are any questions about this idea, because it's kind of important.
So Greg, how many specs would one need in order to reproduce everything that is RChain?
Yeah, so that is a great question. It's a really interesting and fun question. At a minimum, one would need the Casper spec and the Rolang execution spec, and then one would need some kind of specification that's independent of those, that has to do with the incentivization model, right? So Casper is really a framework, and it needs to be instantiated with a number of parameters, and effectively one of those parameters is going to constitute an incentivization model, and there needs to be some game theory slash economic analysis around the incentivization model that's chosen, in order to have that be nailed down as tightly as the other two. So that's kind of your minimum. Now, with respect to our stack, I would argue that our space needs an additional spec around it, and that's because it's such a prominent feature of the framework, and that it would require a lot of innovation, which any conservative here would kind of eye skeptically or suspiciously. All right. So if you are going to provide an alternative execution mechanism for Rolang that was distinct from the RSpace interpretation, that would have to be spec'd out as well. And so my argument would be that RSpace is included, even though in principle one could provide an alternative, and I have done so on numerous occasions throughout my career. But the RSpace is such a prominent piece of the implementation, the path to execution, that should be spec'd out as well. So those would be the four pieces that I think are at a minimum in order to provide a decent coverage. Our space alone, I think, is a much more sophisticated beast than what you find in the yellow paper. Likewise, the K framework spec of Rolang is a much more sophisticated beast than what you find in the yellow paper. Obviously, the Casper spec has taken a great deal of time to get even to this level of maturity, and I think it will take some more time. So this sort of explains to people, I think, why the board rightfully thought it was not a good use of resources to sort of force the co-op to produce the specs until we had a reference implementation in terms of testnet. Does that answer your question, Kenny?
Yeah, I mean, I think it'll probably be more. We'll have a much better idea, like you said, after we actually have something to test against.
Yeah, well, I mean, we do. I want to be careful. We do have something to test against, and in a world of software, it's really important to test aggressively and early. We're seeing that right now with the stability of testnet, right? Testing as early as possible, as often as possible, is something that has to happen in order to deliver quality software. That's why we want to put as many contracts and dApps and other kinds of exercising of the platform into play as early as possible, right? Every dApp should effectively be both or be a suite of unit tests and integration tests against the platform at a minimum. So testing early is important, and people can do that right now.
On the topic of testing the platform, I believe Greg Heiss mentioned that he's available to speak. I'm very curious to hear about where things are at with the portfolio companies.
Oh yeah, that'd be great. Greg, take it away.
Did we lose him?
Okay, maybe we lost him.
I,
Do we have? It looks like Jonathan is not on the call. It would be good to have an RChain Asia update. I know some fun things are happening in RChain Asia. But I did want to, with respect to Casper, I want to start talking about the movement that's happening with respect to the Casper spec. And for that, I'm going to switch devices. So hang on one second.
Greg, we don't have audio on you.
Can you hear me now?
There you go.
Okay, good, awesome. Okay, so I want to go through a little bit of the kind of movement that I was talking about with respect to specs, and try to walk it through sort of a real world or pseudo real world example. So let me just first grab the the link to this little sample document and drop this into the chat. Okay, so this is the document that I'm working against here. And go back to screen share. And then just bring the view up a little bit. Okay, can everyone see what's on the screen?
I can.
Okay, great. So for those people who haven't been following along with Casper, one of the key innovations with respect to Casper is the use of justifications. And this is an idea that I stole for protocol design from linear logic. And I've been using it in protocol design since about 2008, 2009. My advisor at Imperial College, Samson Abramsky, who subsequently moved to Oxford, he and Martin Hyland and Luke Ong were the first to develop game theoretic models of linear logic. And Hyland and Ong used the notion of justifications to prove single-threadedness in concurrent programs that are sort of have linear constraints, and linear constraints are for those people who don't know that area. Linear constraints are the same kind of constraints that you need to prevent double spend, right? You need to be linear in your use of resources, right? So Alice can't spend the exact same tokens to Bob and to Charlie at the same time. And the justification pointers in those games are part of what makes that work. And so here, basically what we're saying is that, messages in the Casper protocol, they have at a minimum three things. One is the signature of the validator, that is the originator of the message. Another is the value that's associated with this particular message. So in the case of a Bitcoin blockchain, a value would be an update against a ledger, or in the case of a blockchain like Ethereum, that would be the update against the virtual machine state. So that's what C is. It could be as simple as just a bit, like 0 or 1. And then a history, and that history is the
the justifications of that particular message. So so essentially, those are the messages that V has received that justify the communication of this value. So in the case where all the validators are agreeing on a bit, right? The originator V of this message is saying that they are determining that the value of the bit is going to be, either 0 or 1, justified by the communications that they've seen here. So this is kind of a recursive spec, right? Because H is literally a list of messages, right? And each of those messages has a corresponding history, which will be a list of messages, and so on. So this message structure gives you enough to construct a view of the communications in the network, and we utilize that, for example, to judge equivocation. So when are the validators lying? So that's something that we can calculate. Now, it turns out that if you look at Vlad's specs, this kind of data type is basically given a set theoretic formulation. And what I'll show here, just or at least indicate to you. I mean, the document goes in more depth. Indicate to you that we can actually turn that structure into a row-lang term. And here's the little recursive spec that does that for you. Essentially, what you do is you construct a for comprehension. That's this piece here. That's waiting on all of the dependencies for this message. So we have some message M. It was delivered to a target validator T. And then there's an extra little parameter here, which is a bookkeeping parameter. Don't have to worry about it too much. It's for those in the know, this is a way of managing namespaces. This S has to do with namespace stuff. But essentially, the dependencies of M are all the messages in its history that justify this message. So obviously, you couldn't send the value C to T unless you had those messages. So that's what this piece is. And then we go and recurse and run this calculation over the messages that are in the dependency or the history of this thing. So that's all this thing does. But notice it's effectively a little one-line definition that turns our message structure into a row-lang term. And that's very nice. So now let me give an example of what this does and how it does it. So suppose we have a cast of characters: Rick, Morty, Summer, Beth, and Jerry, and they are all validators. So R, M, S, B, and J. Now, let's suppose that Rick receives this message, and the message, for purposes of discussion, just to keep things simple, I've kept all of the values to be 0. So this message is justified. This message to Rick from Morty is justified by the messages that Morty has seen. So in this example, if our message structure looked like this, so it came to Rick from Morty, the value was 0, and these are the justifications. So the justifications are Morty received a message from Summer, and that was the first message ever from Summer, so there's no justification there. Morty received a message from Jerry, and it was the first message ever from Jerry, so no justification there. And Morty received a message from Beth, and that's because Beth had seen a message from Rick, right? So we can turn that into a diagram that looks like this. So Morty receives, Rick receives a message from Morty. Morty's message was justified by a message from Summer, a message from Jerry, and a message from Beth that was justified by a message from Rick, right? So this little interaction diagram is a faithful representation of this message. Now, it turns out that you can do another thing. There's a general formula for going from interaction diagrams to row-lang terms as well. And if you run that process, if you run that formula on the diagram, you get exactly the same process or a bisimilar process to the process that's calculated directly from the message structure by this little recursive equation. Now, the reason that's of interest to us is because it now allows us to use equivalences on Rolang terms to determine things like equivocation. And the reason that is important is because now we've actually got Rolang terms and properties of Rolang terms that represent proofs of equivocation or non-equivocation and proofs of other properties in the network. So this is what I mean by correct by construction. And we're starting slowly but surely to get movement in the general CBC Casper crowd towards this kind of construction. And once we have that, then we have a nice, crisp, we're beginning to show that relationship between code that's actually running and proofs of its correctness. So that's, and this turns out to be really, really important when we start to get to tens of thousands of transactions per second. I know I harp on this, but I want to remind everyone that if Ethereum had been running at 40,000 transactions per second, the DAO bug would have taken the entire network down in 1 second. And so as we move towards these higher transaction volumes and higher transaction speeds, we really, really need these kinds of properties to come online. Otherwise, the network is actually more dangerous than the previous generations of these networks. I know we're one minute over, but I just wanted to provide a little color, character, and brain candy all at the same time. Any questions about this?
Could you actually use Rolang as part of the implementation?
I'm sorry, go ahead. Could you repeat that?
Could you actually use some Rolang as part of the implementation, or is this?
Yeah, that's the idea. That's the idea. Is like, I mean, this is still just a toy example, but there's a sort of nice set of stepping stones to get from toy examples like this to real world implementations that actually use Rolang, where the Rolang is a proof of the correctness of the protocol.
Yeah, well, as you were saying before, you know, my playing with Rolang, I can see how you can build something correctly, but then you think of what's going on in the background, and you think of this optimization that can happen, which is sort of, you know, automated, but complex. And, you know, and that's sort of where I see the trying to write a complete spec as being a very difficult thing right now, because you've got this endless process of refinement that makes doing different things practical.
I understand. I understand what you're saying. Yeah, I mean, for me, again, all I'm trying to do is to line up the specification tools so that the specification tools and the implementation tools are have as much overlap as possible. And to that end, I'll just close with an observation that once we have a big chunk of the spec overlapping with the implementation, that means that the characterization of correctness, the formulas that we actually want the terms to be a proof of, are represented in the behavioral types. So when we write down what safety means, for example, in the terms of Casper, we write that down as a behavioral type, and then when the program type checks against that formula, that means that the program, you know, is safe. It's a safe implementation of the protocol. So this is a really a big step up from the kind of expectations that have typically been associated with a lot of formal method efforts, but it's also the new bar with respect to mission critical systems, right? When we're talking about systems that are going to support the transmission of billions of dollars at tens of thousands of transactions per second, if we don't meet that bar, we're just asking for disaster. Because so again, I just want people to understand, right? The DAO didn't happen in the core protocol, right? The DAO happened in a user-defined contract. And the likelihood that there will be bugs in user-defined contracts is 100%.
And there is some decentralization in that shards can vary and can experiment.
Indeed, indeed. So anyway, so thanks to everyone for allowing me to provide a little bit of color and brain candy here. I think that's all we've got for today, unless there are any other questions, comments from anyone in the community.
Greg, are you going to be at the R House, or are you taking off in the next 20 minutes?
I'm at our house for a while.
Okay,
yeah.
I'm going to head over then because I want to update you on a few things.
Sweet. No,
all right.
Thanks. All right, guys, thank you so much, and look forward to chatting.